for a session sponsored by Visit Dallas. Please welcome President and CEO Visit Dallas, Phillip Jones, in discussion with Skift Executive Editor Greg Oates.
Now to some breaking news. Late tonight, the Texas House revived the so-called bathroom bill.
Any attempt to pass legislation that is designed to discriminate against our fellow citizens will result in a multi-billion-dollar disaster for the state of Texas.
As chairman of the board of an organization that selects meeting locations on an ongoing basis, I am here today to say that if discriminatory legislation passes in Texas, we will not bring our meetings to Texas.
An unwelcoming environment created by a state makes meeting planners and their attendees also unwelcome.
Texas legislature adjourned its special session a day early.
The controversial bathroom bill appears now to be dead.
Our work is far from done. We have a lot of work to do.
Good morning, everyone. That event took place in January 2017 on the steps of the Capitol in Austin, Texas, the Texas Capitol. It was a group of stakeholders and business and tourism that were fighting the pending legislation of quote-unquote bathroom bill or religious refusal legislation. You also had some customers there like Bill Reed, who's chairman of the board for PCMA, the Professional Convention Management Association, who is also the head of meetings for the 16,000-member American Society of Hematologists. He decides where to hold meetings on a monthly basis, basically, brings a lot of doctors to destinations, and you heard him say if that bill passed, he would not bring his meetings to Texas. And also, just a little bit of background. In North Carolina, a lot of you are familiar with what happened in March 2016 when they did pass the HB2 bathroom bill. Response was swift. Events canceled from around the world, conventions, meetings. In February 2017, the NBA All-Star Game moved to New Orleans from Charlotte. So the consequences were significant. Associated Press says that overall, $3.7 billion in economic loss over 12 years. So today we have Phillip. Thank you for joining us today from Visit Dallas.
Thank you.
Phillip basically stewarded this process from day one. So first of all, Phillip, just in your words, what is religious refusal legislation?
Well, religious refusal legislation is the ability for an organization or a business or individual to refuse service to an individual based on deeply held religious beliefs. And I guess the most common example of that is the bakery in Colorado that decided they didn't want to sell a cake to a gay couple. And so that is an issue that the Supreme Court recently ruled on. And so I think it's emboldening individuals who feel like they can pass legislation to allow what we call discriminatory legislation to enforce something like that.
The caveat there, though, is that Baker is a private industry. What we're talking about is laws for public spaces and environments. Okay, so take us through what happened starting on day one, the legislative session. You brought this coalition together, Texas Welcomes All. Just tell us the factors and motivations that sort of drove that.
Well, as you mentioned, in North Carolina, we saw the impact of what had happened in North Carolina. And in Texas, you have an interesting dynamic where all the big cities like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin have very progressive non-discrimination ordinances on the books. But after what happened in North Carolina, they had a referendum in Houston and overturned the local non-discrimination ordinance. So we knew it was led by the lieutenant governor of Texas. And so we knew that there would be an attempt at the state level to do the same thing. So we sort of raised the alarm bells and said, we've got to stand up and speak out against this, because in the case of Texas, 1 in 10 trade shows in America is held in Texas. So just in Dallas alone, we had 45 groups that were threatening to cancel their meeting or convention if we had that type of legislation, were successful in passing the legislature. And so we knew the economic impact would be significant, so we felt it was our responsibility to stand up and speak out against it.
How did you get buy-in? Were people eager to join the coalition?
Yeah, early on it was me. And the Texas Association of Business, which had traditionally been a very conservative, organization, that stood up and said, no, this is wrong. We have to speak out against it. And then little by little, as we began the process of meeting with legislators, educating them, talked with our Republican Speaker of the House, he agreed with us on this issue, and he said, you got a lot of work to do. So we put together this coalition, and we met with individual legislators, and we tried a series of press conferences and just public events to really bring some awareness to the issue. And, bit by bit, we started to gather a little bit of momentum. But early on, it was pretty lonely. But at the end, we had all the major businesses and corporations in Texas speaking out against it. And so we were successful in defeating it.
So as the leader of a destination marketing organization or Convention and Visitors Bureau or Tourism Board, it's customary for you to engage local town council, city council, and mayors, but not so much at the state level. So was there ever any concern that this really wasn't your role to take on as a DMO, and that you were kind of stepping outside of your lane?
Well, it was. I mean, we thought that the Texas Travel Industry Association would take the lead on this issue, but they decided to take a pass. They were afraid of the consequences of their other issues with the lieutenant governor leading the charge against this. So it left it up to me. And, I felt like it was my responsibility, because Dallas would be the city that would be impacted the most, to speak out and to start to try and lead this effort to defeat the legislation. And, you're right. We traditionally always stayed in our lane and focused on the stuff that mattered to us locally. But if we didn't speak out and play an active role at the state level, then this would have passed. They had the votes to pass it in the House. And so we had to really convince enough House members to agree with us on this issue and to stop it in the House, because it passed out of the Senate twice, overwhelmingly.
And just having covered, tourism and destination marketing for years, there's not a lot of precedent for this, where one CEO leader just stood up and said enough, saw the future, and said, we've got to stop this now.
Yeah, and I think what gave me a little bit of credibility and also some comfort was in Dallas, we passed a non-discrimination ordinance that was voted on by the people, with 77% of the voters in Dallas saying, we agree that discrimination is bad. It's bad for your image. It's bad for business. And so that gave me, I think, the cover that I needed to be able to speak out loudly against this type of legislation. And then bit by bit, we were able to convince El Paso and Houston and Austin and San Antonio. And then soon, all the small CVBs in Texas joined our coalition. And then we reached out to business leaders in the chambers of commerce and other, and they all joined our effort. And so, collectively, we had a much more powerful voice. And that made a difference. And I think the takeaway for me is, have to stay engaged in the process. You have to educate legislators. You have to educate candidates. You have to raise money and support candidates who agree with you on the issues. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting this fight over and over again. And Texas is a bit of a bellwether state, because they know on the other side, if they pass this type of legislation in Texas, it opens up the floodgates for other states. And that's why we really felt strongly that we had to take a lead on this issue.
So that started in January. Legislative session in Texas is January to May. You're up there constantly, week after week, face-to-face, one-on-one meetings.
Right.
Can you just talk a little bit about that process? Some people, you could sort of flip them a little bit. Other people said no. Just what was the response?
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't know a lot of the legislators outside of the Dallas delegation, so I took it upon myself to meet with as many of them as would meet with me. I hired a firm, and they set up meetings for me, and I would go into some of the meetings, and they're from small towns in rural Texas. And in some cases, they totally understood the argument we were making about the economic impact and the job losses and the image damage it would do to the brand of Texas, and they agreed with us, small rural areas of Texas. And others, there are some legislators, even one of the senators from Dallas, I went in to meet with him and told him all the issues with North Carolina, what would happen in Texas, what would happen in Dallas, $2 billion in cancellations, and he threw me out of his office. So, it just really depended on, the perspective of the individual member and where they stood on the issue. But, we were lucky in the House to have the Speaker of the House, pro-business Republican, pro-tourism Republican from San Antonio, and he helped us, guide us through the process. And without his support, there's no doubt in my mind it would have passed the House as well.
But sometimes you were just shut down, even when you show what happened in North Carolina.
The answer would be, I don't care. And I'd say, well, you should care, because it's jobs and it's economic impact for your community. And they're like, we don't believe those numbers out of North Carolina. And I said, well, if you don't believe the numbers out of North Carolina, and you don't believe in the canceled conventions and the relocations of events and also business recruitment, then you really need to take another look. And, but you can't convince someone who so strongly believes that discrimination is okay.
Mm-hmm. So it's about building consensus with your partners and coming at the legislators from all different angles and having the data, but really just the will and the intention from everyone involved in tourism in Texas and the Fortune 500 companies, and just all with the same message and just hammering away at that. So I'm just trying to get to the takeaways here. So what are some of the things you mentioned that being more politically active is important, but at a state level? So we're really talking about the evolving role of destination marketing and management now. What other things did you learn from this project?
Well, I learned that we can't just assume that someone else is going to do it. If you don't step up and do it, it won't happen. The other takeaway is we have to be more engaged politically in raising money to support candidates who agree with us on the issues, because oftentimes we would think it was someone else's responsibility. And it's very important that we understand that we have to stay engaged in the process every step of the way. And one of the things we did is we supported 30 candidates who are running for the State House with the support of a group of other individuals and organizations, and we won 21 of those 30 elections in the primaries for Republican primaries, and there are another 8 to 10 seats that we hope to flip in the Texas House that would flip from Republican to Democrat in those districts that are not in agreement with us on these issues. So it's really being engaged politically. And you have to get your board to support you, you have to get the city to support you, you have to get their buy-in on the front end, and then go out and tell your story. Because when reasonable people understand this issue, they get it. It's the folks who are, who strongly believe that it's okay to discriminate. In the case of the bathroom bill in Texas, there's never been a case of an individual who's attacked, a transgender who's attacked someone in a bathroom in Texas. But that was their big, rallying cry. So we brought the faith community. We had 600 religious leaders. We brought every chief of police from every major city in Texas who said it's not an issue from a law enforcement perspective. So we really forged coalitions with a variety of individuals and organizations that we never worked with before. And my job and our job at Texas Welcomes All is to keep it alive and to keep going, because it's coming back. The Republican Party of Texas gave us their priority 5 items, and the bathroom bill is yet again one of their priorities. So we'll be fighting the fight again this January, and hopefully our track record will lead us to be successful, not once, not twice, but hopefully a third time.
Do other leaders here of destination organizations need to prepare for this? I know Todd Davidson's here from Oregon. He'll probably be okay in Oregon, but...
I can take some of your legislators from Oregon and use them in Texas. That would be nice.
But for some other, say, like you said, this is Texas being a bellwether state, if something happens and it does pass and that inspires other states to take this on, should some of these DMO leaders in the South and Midwest, not to stereotype, but that's the case, start preparing any kind of new measures based on what you did?
Absolutely. I think if you're smart, what you'll do is start to engage and build those coalitions now. You may not need them, but should it happen, you'll have that relationship. So it's not the first time you make a phone call to your counterpart who's the president of the chamber, or local business leaders, or local sports teams. We got the Dallas Stars and other sports teams to really engage in this process with us, and soon the Mavericks and the other sports teams engaged with us. So start building those coalitions and relationships now, so that if you need them, you can call on them, as opposed to what we had to do is like, I've never met you, but I need your help. And,
now.
Yeah, and can you step up and help me with this? And most of them did, but some of them's like, no, we're not taking a position on this issue.
Wow. Another thing that I was surprised about was when I first saw this happen in January, because it was defeated in August of 2017, I thought it was kind of like a one and done, but I had no idea just how much legislation every year, more this year, starting in January, is being put on the docket. So this is a constant battle. You're dealing with this forever now.
Unfortunately, we have a strong alliance with the Texas Association of Business, and we've identified the issues that are coming up. And, I will be in Austin fighting the fight again, starting in January. I mean, as soon as PCMA Convening Leaders ends, I'm headed to Austin. And we'll start that process of educating the new members so they have an understanding of what the impact would be and the negative consequences and the damage to the Texas brand. Because it's crazy to think that Texas, which is a very welcoming state, we want people from all over the world to come and visit, to do business there, and we have these great cities that are very progressive, and so we don't want to be tarnished by that image of being discriminatory and unwelcoming, because that's not who we are as a state or as our people are.
Okay, you mentioned PCMA, which is taking place in Pittsburgh in January this year. Is this something as an industry, especially on the meetings and events side and the other meetings, main business, and MPI, and all those groups should be talking about more intentionally and more collectively and establishing these best practices?
Yeah, in fact, at PCMA this year in Nashville, I talked on a panel about this very issue, and MPI and PCMA and ASAE were all engaged as part of Texas Welcomes All. They made contributions to our effort to help get our messaging out through social media and digital media, and I assume we'll be doing the same thing again, because this is not one and done. It will continue.
It's inspiring. All right, thank you, Phillip.
Thank you very much.
Okay.